What is up, addicts? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network, and welcome to the beginning of our player breakdown series for 2020. I'm going to go through and give you guys an in-depth analysis over each of the fantasy relevant players heading into the 2020 season. And beginning with that, the first team we're going through is the 49ers. We'll start with a quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, giving you guys an in-depth analysis of what we can expect from him. And we'll begin by looking at last year's stats. It's a good place to start. Just kind of give us a baseline of what we can expect. Now, pretty productive season from Jimmy Garoppolo. First full year as the starter for the 49ers after sustaining that ACL injury early on in 2018. It comes out slightly under 4,000 passing yards, right at 27 passing touchdowns. 16 interceptions in total, and doesn't really give you much in terms of rushing yards or upside there. Ended up with 248.4 points through week 16, which put him 14th at the position. Not great when you consider how replaceable quarterbacks are, especially when you look at as well at his fantasy points per game. It was actually 16.6, which is 20th at the position. Plenty of injuries last year led to some guys underperforming in total points, but still performing better week to week. We actually break this down though and look at the game logs. You can see that there at least was some upside to Jimmy Garoppolo. He has 2 blue weeks and another week that he almost breached into that top 3 category, playing against the Saints in week 14. So he definitely had games where, if you were starting him in DFS or you had him as a streamer option that week, especially when he played Arizona, those always seem to turn into shootouts really fast. But this team is very much run first, run heavy. That's the design of the offense. That's the way that Kyle Shanahan wants to run it, and it worked. I mean, they made the Super Bowl, almost won the Super Bowl on that formula. It's hard to imagine that they would shift away from that too much, but there definitely is some upside here when you understand that he at least has the ceiling. Not having that rushing floor is definitely going to hurt fantasy upside, especially just with the way that standard scoring works for running quarterbacks. But it's also not impossible to imagine a world where the 49ers defense regresses a little bit and they get into some games where they're going to have to rely a little bit more on Jimmy Garoppolo. And I feel like just based on looking at his overall finish, it's easy to forget that he did have multiple weeks where he was really good. I mean, look at a couple 4 touchdown, 3 4 touchdown weeks, another 3 touchdown week. His quarterback rating, with the exception of a couple games, was typically over 100, and overall, had a pretty good season. It just was never really relied on or leaned on. So when we dug a little bit deeper into some of the metrics here, some of these things stood out to us. So he is actually really low in deep ball attempts. He only had 36, which is 29th in the entire NFL, but he actually ranked first in the NFL in deep ball completion percentage, 55.6%. So that's a pretty interesting fact to consider, especially with guys like George Kittle. Seeing some of, and we'll get into this in the George Kittle video, but seeing some of the least amount of deep targets, but very efficient when he does get those. So it wouldn't be hard to imagine for Jimmy Garoppolo to be expected to throw the ball a little bit deeper. His true completion percentage also very high, 76.7%, which is third in the NFL. Now, another interesting thing too, you notice he had 16 interceptions. He had 28 interceptable passes. That means he had 75% additional passes that could have very easily been intercepted. Number 7th in the NFL. So that's a little bit interesting. If he does throw more interceptions, that might, it seems counterintuitive, but that might actually help his fantasy value, because if he's making sure that the opposing team is staying in the game, he's going to have to continue throwing the ball more, and they can't rely 100% on their run game. And also 43 in danger plays. So although he had a pretty efficient season and accurate for the most part, he definitely took some risks, and we could definitely see the efficiency go down, but the total volume go up, which in this case, I think volume is, when you have a quarterback that isn't running the ball much, you pretty much need volume for them to hit their absolute ceiling. And right now, we're not getting either volume or rushing ability. All we're getting is low volume with efficiency, and that's not really how you score a lot of fantasy points. Last year as well, the 49ers were number 2 in run rate with a pass to run ratio of 51 to 49, so that's not helping matters much either. Now they do lose Matt Breida, but with Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman there, it's still likely that they're going to continue running the ball a bit more than passing. In our projections, we actually have the 49ers defense not as efficient, so we're expecting Jimmy Garoppolo to have to do a little bit more. We have him right now at 4,100 yards, 28 passing touchdowns, and 13 interceptions, a slight decrease. Not really much in the way of rushing yards as well. So that would put him at 263.7 fantasy points. Would be a respectable season, but his upside ranking, we assigned a 2 out of 5 because, again, without that rushing upside, you're going to need massive volume from Jimmy Garoppolo to hit his max ceiling. And the only way you could really expect that to happen, going back to his game log here real quick, those blue weeks where he hit in the top 3 producer at the quarterback position, or even the dark green weeks where he was in top 6, like those are games where the 49ers were in situations where they needed to score a lot of points. And it's hard to imagine, unless their defense sustains a lot of injuries, it's really hard to imagine that there would be a situation that Jimmy Garoppolo would be relied on to hit much above this ceiling. So I feel like the projected stats we have for him right now is actually pretty close to his ceiling, and it's just not very exciting from a week by week stat line, just when you consider that there's plenty of other quarterbacks around him that give greater upside and also have a rushing floor. So probably not going to end up with Jimmy Garoppolo on any of our teams this year. If we can start to predict a little bit better when we expect the games to go into a shootout. Like last year, it was pretty obvious when they were going to play the Saints that was going to turn into a high-scoring game. He could definitely be a streaming quarterback option, but not someone that we're really excited about in best ball because those hits come very few and far between, and his floor is incredibly low. So that's our insight on Jimmy Garoppolo, and we'll continue going through the rest of the 49ers here in our next videos. Hit that like and subscribe button, and also check out FantasyAddictionNetwork.com if you guys are looking for a full list of rankings. We'll see you guys in the next video.